In this set of mini lectures, we're going to talk about ornamental plant breeding. So, for ornamental plant breeding, we have two basic breeding schemes that we follow to get a new and exciting plant. In the first scheme, we take our existing plant, or usually plants, and we make a cross. So we do sexual propagation. We have one parent plant with one desirable characteristic, a second one with a second desirable characteristic, and we pollinate them with each other. Fertilization occurs and we get seeds that we then plant out. We do this enough times that we find a desired plant, and then once we get the plant that we want, we then asexually propagate it so we can get lots of plants that are exactly like that for distribution and sale. The second scheme is exactly the same, but this is the scheme we go to when sexual propagation doesn't work for whatever reason, and we'll talk about what those reasons are. When that happens, we essentially do something funky to it. We zap it. Now that's not a technical term, so don't get caught up on it, but basically what this usually means is we induce mutation in that plant. And this is something we've talked about before when we were discussing chimeras. But if you can't get the type of plant you want by sexual propagation, the next avenue that you have is to try to induce a change in your existing plant by mutating it or zapping it in some way. So this is the key step right here. For both of them, once you get the desired plant, you meet the goal that you're after for breeding, you then asexually propagate that plant. So here actually with breeding, we're using sexual and asexual propagation in conjunction with each other. So what's our desired plant exactly? Well, if we're a plant breeder, our desired plant is something that's going to sell. Now, would you buy these tulips? I would. They're nice, bright red tulips. And long ago, if you remember from your chimera lectures, solid colored tulips like these were all that was available. Suddenly, what shows up on the seed but, bam, two-color tulips. Well, that's much more exciting. Now, if you remember from the Freaks and Mutants lecture, you'll remember that the double-colored tulips were the result of tulip-breaking virus, and that was a bad thing. However, since then, plant breeders have figured out how to produce tulips that are more than one color through plant breeding, which is much more sustainable than a virus. It's not hurting the plant. And so, why have one-color tulips when you can have two-color tulips, right? So in this case, something new and different is what's desired. There are a lot of other things that are desirable than just different color flowers, although that's a big one because a lot of people grow plants, particularly ornamental plants, for flowers. Some other breeding goals might be fragrance, a good fragrance, for example. Again, if you're in North Carolina at this time of year, the Bradford pears are blooming. If you don't know what a Bradford pear is, it will be, at this time, covered in white flowers. It's a tree. It's very globe-shaped, and they smell horrible. My grad school advisor, who is a plant breeder, is working on, and has been working on, I think for the past, 20 years, breeding a Bradford pear that doesn't smell horrible. Fragrance is very difficult to breed for. It's a multi-gene trait, so that's why it's taking so long. Plus, it's a tree, and breeding trees takes a long time because you have to grow them on from seed to see if you got what you wanted. Foliage, basically any different color leaf, red leaves, purple leaves, variegated leaves. Plants with different growth forms, so you can breed, just as you can graft to get dwarf plants and weeping plants, you can also breed for those traits. And then anything that makes the plant tougher, such as cold hardiness, heat tolerance, disease resistance, and again, as I said, anything different. And here's what I mean by anything different. Do you like this plant? If you said yes, you're definitely a high-level plant nerd. This is a white mulberry, which is sort of a weedy plant anyways, but mulberries typically have very large, glossy leaves. This is a cultivar called Nuclear Blast. The leaves are not large, glossy leaves. They are very, very finely dissected. They almost look tattered, like it's survived a nuclear blast. I don't think it's particularly attractive, but when it was released a few years ago, it was new, and we had it for sale at the plant sale that we have at the Arboretum, and it sold out because people just want something new and different. Doesn't always necessarily have to be attractive. So one other thing, and I just want to take a moment here to mention that we're talking about breeding of ornamental plants. I'm not going to go into the breeding of edible plants. The techniques that we're going to discuss with ornamental plants are still applicable with edible plants, but because edible plants are such a much larger cash crop, anything grown agriculturally and on a large scale for food purposes is going to be bred with much more advanced techniques. A lot of those plants are genetically modified in that they actually go in and insert specific genes into those plants. This is not done very much with ornamental plants because in order to do that, you need to know the whole genetic code of that plant. Genetic codes of ornamental plants tend to be very large as compared to something like, say, a tomato. And there are so many different types of ornamental plants that it would take forever to find out the genetic codes of all of them. So we use some more simple, basic techniques with ornamental plants. So moving on to that, we'll talk about one rather controversial area for ornamental plants. Ornamental plants tend to be less controversial than edible plants because, of course, we're not eating it, so we're a little more relaxed about it. But one issue is the issue of invasive plants. These are plants that are going to spread out of the area they were originally planted in, maybe crowd out native plants, and just in general take over. So, to deal with this issue, and the plant pictured here is one called burning bush. It's a widely sold ornamental. They grow it in the medians here around Raleigh pretty frequently. But there's concerns about its invasiveness, and so here the desired thing that we may breed for is sterility or infertility, so that it doesn't produce a bunch of seed that the birds eat and spread it everywhere. Breeding for sterility or infertility is a good alternative to banning a whole species. If you ban a whole species, you can really hurt the nursery industry. Better to breed a sterile cultivar and then maybe ban everything except for the sterile cultivar. And here's an article where people are doing exactly that with burning bush. So you can see it has been listed as an invasive plant in a lot of states. You can see they say there's outright sales bans in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And so the University of Connecticut and also NC State is working on this as well. They're working on breeding a burning bush that will not produce viable seeds, so it won't invade, and so we can still grow it and enjoy its nice red fall foliage without causing trouble. And so with that, we're going to stop for now. In the next few mini lectures, we'll go more in detail about those two breeding schemes that I showed you.